So thanks to Managing Director of Bounga Informatics on the stage for his welcome speech. Well, it's the stage. Yes.
Thank you. He's just handed me my clicker. Okay. You haven't instructed me how to use it. I bet you're all jealous now because apparently the latest regulations as of yesterday is when you are speaking, you are allowed to take off your mask.
Yes.
So there we go. So as we all know, that's completely harmless, isn't it? Because nothing happened in Singapore when people went to karaoke and started singing. Okay, good morning, everybody. I know one or two of you actually know me, but I'm Frank Butler. I'm the Managing Director of Bounga Informatics. And welcome all of you, and thank you very much indeed for coming. Just a very brief preamble to talk to you this morning about what's going to happen. So there's a picture of me, and following me, you're going to hear from Randy Goh, who is the VP, newly appointed VP here in Singapore for Open Text. We do a lot of business with Open Text, and Randy's going to talk to you a little bit from his perspective as well. But I just want to set the scene here this morning. I calculated, and I was just saying to the people on my table, it's been 2 years and 2.5 months since I actually did a live event. We've done some live training, and if the rules here you think are confusing, and for example, on our table, Magda has just said to me, is there no coffee? Well, the regulations as of last Friday were, yes, there was coffee. The regulations later on Friday were, no, you can't have coffee, but you can have water. So obviously now we know that all the extensive scientific research has proven which coffee is actually a regulating increasing agent for COVID. So if you drink coffee, you're obviously going to get it. Water's fine. My mother, when we were kids and we wanted lemonade, my mother used to say to me, lions drink water, which I was never entirely clear of because I never saw lions drinking lemonade, but obviously it just meant we couldn't have lemonade. But it wasn't that long ago, when you think back, I know it was 2 years and 2 months, but it wasn't that long ago when organizations only, and I've put that in parentheses there or in quote marks, wasn't that long ago that organizations only had to worry about traditional attacks on their fortress which holds their data. And what do I mean by traditional attacks? And we've all seen this. Now, as you know, to be a hacker, hackers are very easy to identify because they always wear either a mask, one of those anonymous type masks, or they wear a balaclava hood. So if you see anybody walking around in Singapore with a balaclava hood, either they've escaped from a mental hospital or they're a hacker. Well, real hackers actually look like that. Those are two real hackers. The guy in the white jacket is Carl Strickland, and the other guy's Neil Woods. They were the first two hackers in the UK to go to prison for hacking. And I was the arresting officer for Carl Strickland. So that's what real hackers look like. I don't think either of them had a balaclava or an anonymous mask. They were both very good, but they were the traditional attackers on your fortress of data. And then we've got these attackers as well, who are trainee hackers, so state-sponsored hacking. And these were the things that people had to worry about. But their objectives were always the same. Whoever they were, whether they were balaclavaed hackers, non-balaclavaed hackers, or hackers in uniform, their objectives were all the same. What they wanted was the keys to your kingdom. And that's what they all sought, was the keys to your kingdom. Them looking for it is one thing, but you give these keys freely to other people, don't you? So you defend, and stop people getting your keys. But by the same token, you give the keys to the people who wear not just the balaclava, but the mask, your own people. Okay, your trusted staff. But work has changed, hasn't it? I'm very old now, and I've had in my lifetime 3 jobs, real jobs. In 1 year, in 2016, I actually had 4 jobs. So I don't really count those because none of them lasted more than a year. But in my main lifetime of employment, I worked 26.5 years for the Merseyside Police, and I worked 16.5 years for Guidance Software, who were taken over in the end by Open Text. But things have changed because I had jobs for a period of a lifetime. Nowadays, we have a transitory, movable, migratory workforce. And what price job loyalty? So we do professional services at Bounga, and regularly we get the story, oh, he left, he took our data with him. Okay, so how was he able to take your data? Because you give him the access. And all people did in order to protect themselves was they used, for example, the prevention methods, which you've all seen here. Okay, and just take a minute to read those and think, how many of those do I have in place to protect my data? And then the next part was we actually had the detection, intrusion detection systems. How many of you live in areas where people park their cars and the car alarm goes off? And what do you do? As a concerned resident, what do you do? The answer is two things, either nothing or curse. Because it's 1 o'clock in the morning and the car alarm's going off and you think, why do they choose for the car alarm to go off at 1 in the morning? If you think about it for a moment, an intrusion detection system is fairly limited, isn't it? Because once the alarm is going off, it can't go off more. Once it's ringing and it says somebody intruded into your car or your data system, you can't say, oh, they're intruding a lot more now. You don't have variable tones that say, oh, now they're in the glove box of your car, now they're in the trunk of your car, now they're doing this to your car. It's just an alarm. In the brief period that I was a uniformed policeman, policemen were very, very diligent about automatic alarms, and they would respond to those automatic alarms and say, not again. Because the alarm would go off at Tesco's. It's like, this is the 4th time this week. Okay, so again, we have these things in place. And then latterly, people would put in place, and people were reluctant to do this because the IDS would go off, all the other warning systems would go off, indicating to you that your green sanctions had all been breached. And then what did you do? Nothing again. Did you fix it? Did you remediate? Probably not. So you'd leave it a couple of weeks, you'd rebuild everything, you'd fix everything, and then a couple of weeks later you'd say, oh, happened again. It's like the alarm at Tesco's, it goes off every Tuesday. So you'd do nothing. Okay, but then suddenly, as we've already alluded to, and as we're already being affected by this morning, the whole world changed. So everything in our world was turned upside down. And this gigantic COVID bowling ball knocked down the pillars of our society. And it has. We do things now that we would never have dreamed of 2 years ago. And we now just accept them. A long, long time ago when I worked for guidance, my VP of training had a favorite saying. He used to say, oh, how quickly we become blasé. And we have. Everybody's sitting here now wearing masks. If I'd have said to you 2.5 years ago, oh, we'll go to an event and we'll all sit there with a mask on, you'd have probably thought it was a Halloween event or some other fancy dress event. You wouldn't have thought we were sitting here with a mask on, which we can only drop, and I'll use my friend here as an example, you can only drop when you're drinking because COVID can't affect you when you're drinking. He's rapidly put his mask on. I didn't mean to scare you there, sir. Okay. Right, but our whole life changed, and this is now our new life, isn't it? I can't remember, do I work at home or do I live at work? And people, apart from the obvious risks that we're going to talk about and dwell on here today, people are thinking about other risks as well. The risks to your staff members. Unscrupulous employers have actually expected people to work 23.5 hours a day. People also find it really difficult. Confession, I can't work at home. I hate it. Absolutely hate it. Because it takes me about 3 to 4 minutes to think of something I'd rather do more. Be it laundry, reaching up to the top cupboard to check if I've got this in stock, to check this, to check that, then to think, oh, should put laundry outside now. And then you think, what was I doing? Whereas when you're in work, you're actually sitting there and you're focused on being at work. And your security focus is at work. When you're at home, it's like, oh, I'm writing to my auntie, my uncle to say thank you for my birthday present. And what security do I need for that? None. Okay, so working at home, as you can see, very, very easy. So this lady is obviously in a conference call. And it was a novelty, wasn't it? A couple of years ago, it was a complete novelty. Let's have a conference call. Let's put video on. Hands up all those that are sick of conference calls with video. Absolutely sick. And they're now saying, oh, people are becoming wiped out by them. Tell me this wasn't the quote of the year for 2020. You seem to spend, you go on these conference calls, and it's like, no, the button in the bottom corner, no, well, he can't hear you. Why? Because your mic's switched off. And you have conference calls, and you spend about 15 minutes at the beginning of every conference call arranging so you actually speak to each other. And then, have you seen the conference call bingo? Where you have to do all the, I do this, and you say, I'm sorry, I've got to jump off and be on another call now. And you spend forever arranging a conference call. And we deal with companies in a lot of other countries. And you get up at ungodly hours. I'm not going to be completely racist here and say that certain countries only accept their time zone, because certain of them do. And I'm sure certain of you already realize which country I'm talking about. The number of times that it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you're on a conference call and you only want to say two things. And you can't get on because somebody else is rabbiting on and on and on. And you put your hand up, your electronic hand, and everybody just ignores it. And there's no button in any of these applications. There's no bang on the table button, is there? Because it'd be really good if you could say, for God's sake, let me speak, because I just want to go to bed. I did a conference call just about 2 months ago where I waited up until 1:30 in the morning Singapore time, and I just wanted to raise an issue over handling of PDF files. That's all I wanted to raise. And I had to listen to hardware issues, and it was now 3:25 by the time I got to say something. And as I put my hand up, they went, well, we're going to have to cut this short because time is getting on here in, I nearly said which country. I won't say which country it is, but it begins with U and ends in A. And it's not United Arab Emirates, okay? The first word is United. Okay, but basically you end up at 3:25 being told, well, we've no time for that now. It's like, I've sat here absolutely bored out of my skull listening to your problem, and my problem doesn't get spoken about. Why is this suddenly giving me a screen message here? Okay, so things change. Okay, remote workers are a different security risk. You saw the lady there with her children bound and gagged on the floor. Okay, but what about all those precautions that you put in place? And even worse, many years ago when it was mooted, bring your own device. I used to shudder because what are they bringing? They can bring all sorts of pieces of junk, and what security exists on this? Not so many years ago, we ran an event here where the great idea was that every single person would install a particular forensic program on their machine. And we sent out a list of minimum machine specs. That was treated basically as a joke. And at the time, Windows 7 was the state of the art, and people had a significant amount of RAM. And I actually got a person who attended the conference and who expected us to install software on a machine that was running Windows 98 second edition. Yeah. And the lady who it belonged to was stunned when I said, this just isn't going to work. Why not? I don't know. bill.gates@microsoft.com may be able to help you. But anyway, we get to the stage where people neglect things. And it's not just me saying this. If we look, Cisco Those of you that browse the BBC News website, this survey from Cisco is touted every single day. Cybersecurity in the new norm. Hands up those who like the new norm. Absolutely nobody. Okay, and yet you hear now, oh, this is what we're going to get used to. This is what we accept. Well, we accept it grudgingly, I guess. And the cybersecurity threats, Cisco have come out with some very, very interesting figures. Very shortly, we're going to have a panel session. And the people who are sitting on the table with me to my right here have vast amounts of experience and work for organizations. And in some cases are working from home, in some cases are visiting the office, in some cases are visiting a virtual office. So let's try and draw on their experience. And then I've mentioned the BBC. Why remote working leaves us vulnerable to cyber attacks. This is actually happening. Because the IT departments are looking around saying, well, yeah, this is what we would like to do, but we can't actually do this because we can't mandate this because we're allowing people to work from home. A friend of mine in Singapore works for a fairly large engineering company who undertake government contracts here in Singapore. They were stunned when they found out during the first big lockdown that they had to work from home, even though they were responsible for the ventilation and heating systems, well, not heating, cooling systems for large government organizations, but nobody was in the office, so nobody cared. So they were told work from home. So their boss, in a stunning moment of blinding stupidity, said, oh, all work from home and actually just go home and do your work. What did he provide them with? Nothing. So he suddenly discovered that his accountant was working from home on her phone, using her own phone. And she was using Excel on her hand phone. So his accounts for the company, which deal in millions of Singapore dollars, was being run from a hand phone. In the end, he had to buy computers and give all the staff computers to work from home. When he got them back, and the systems analyst who's responsible for IT, she found that most of the people in the company had been very diligent and had installed things, mainly games. I'm not joking. Okay, it's our job to maintain cybersecurity. It's your job. You come from organizations where it's your organization's duty that they place on you, or the duty placed on you by your organizations, to maintain cybersecurity. Well, let me just give you a salutary warning before I sign off for the morning. The gentleman here on this slide is Robert Burns, the Scottish poet. And in a poem that Robert Burns wrote, which was called Ode to a Mouse, he said, the best laid schemes, and this is in Scottish language, I'll translate in a moment. I'm not Scottish, I'm a Scouser, I'm from Liverpool. Okay, the best laid schemes o' mice and men gang after gley, and lay us all with naught but grief and pain. And it means wherever you decide to do, it all gets considerably up. I'm sorry, the microphone failed there for the word, right, okay? Right. Whatever you decide to do, it will get messed up. Why? Because there's a human element. And also, the human element on the security side has the best laid plans of mice and men and IT managers, and they get messed up. So whatever you plan, it will go awry. Whatever can go wrong, will go wrong. You need to legislate and actually make sure that you are expanding your security regime to their homes. And there's no point in being shy about it, because look what happens when you don't. You get computers back which are full of games. Okay, very shortly, I'm going to mention, again, the MC will introduce them, but we're going to have a panel which will be staffed by my good friends on the table here, Ms. Anna Blezard, who is with FTI Consulting, Dr. Magda Celli, who's with the Marsh Group, Mr. Michael Liu, who's with Roger and Tan Technologies, and last but not least, my good friend, Mr. Pravin Pandey, who's with Standard Chartered. These people will be available at the end of that panel session, not just for my questions, but for your questions as well. They didn't know that until we sat down today, but I had them tied to the table so that they couldn't leave. Okay, so if you ask questions, and I've given them some question evasion techniques, which I saw espoused by the former British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, who would say, so the lady here asked me a question, and what Maggie would do is she'd go, you know, I'm so pleased you asked me that question. You've given me the opportunity today to speak of something which is clearly important to you and clearly important to all of us. And I'm so pleased, as I say, to have this arena where I can give you an answer to that question and then promptly wouldn't give any answer whatsoever. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Kenneth now, who's going to speak and introduce our next speaker to you. And thank you very much indeed for your time. And sadly, I've got to put my mask on.
Thank you, Frank. For our next speaker, as Frank introduced earlier, will be Mr. Wendy Goh. He's the Regional Vice President from OpenText. Please welcome. Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Kenneth. Thanks, Frank, for the introduction. Once again, my name is Randy, not Wendy. Yeah. So I'm with OpenText. I'm the VP for OpenText in Southeast Asia. In fact, I just joined about less than 3 months. Want to take this opportunity to also thank OpenText, Frank and Don for inviting to thank Bounga for inviting OpenText to be part of this event. And also take this opportunity to also welcome each and every one of you. You know, it's very challenging during this COVID, but want to welcome every one of you. Okay, so OpenText and Bounga, we have been partners since 2018. They are actually managing our distribution channels for our OpenText and K solutions, and they are also our implementers and deployments across the Southeast Asia. As a matter of fact, they are also our certified trainers for Asia Pacific. So over the next 5 minutes, I'm just gonna very quickly, I don't have any funny slides here, but just very quickly introduce OpenText and what do we do in this space of security. So Frank mentioned several of the stuff earlier. Last year, we saw about 20 billion in terms of losses due to cybercrime. Actually, this number is expected to raise to about 6 trillion this year alone. And we also saw about 94% of the enterprises are suffering some kind of security breaches over the last 12 months. Yeah, and 28% of these victims are from SMB business itself. As we can see, also, there are several attacks like for in the areas like Garmin's, Brookfield, and even like University of Utah. All this you can see that here. But with the advancement in AI and machine learning, we are also seeing that a lot of the hackers are using AI and machine learning to automate a lot of their process. So what does it really mean? It actually means that they are actually attacking faster and more intelligently. Yeah, so we got to be very careful here. We also saw that a lot of companies, in terms of their security teams, they are drowning with a lot of alerts. Some of them gets like 1 million events every day. Yeah, and using more than 25 different security tools to cope with all these issues that they're facing on a daily basis. As Frank mentioned, the COVID working from home, and just like Frank, I hate working from home, but it's becoming a norm for most of us. As a matter of fact, I joined 3 months ago, and some of my colleagues, I'm seeing them first time, even today itself. So I've not seen a lot of my colleagues. We'll be using a lot of team meetings, things like Teams and as well as Zoom. So we saw that about 20,000% increase in terms of malicious file, in terms of using Zoom, and this could be using your names. And you work from home, as Frank mentioned, there's a lot of cases where it breaches a lot of remote desktop. We saw about 40% increase in unsecured desktop. And then if you look at from COVID, last year we know that a lot of new websites been generated related to COVID, and 2% of this are actually malicious. And for web roots, we actually discovered about 1.5 million unique threats in the month of May alone. This is like 3 times for the last 3 years. For enterprise like you, what does it really mean? It means that you are facing more threats and risks than ever. Needless to say, there is a risk in terms of data loss, your financial impact to it, as well as your business are being interrupted or disrupted. And in return, you are actually seeing the profitability dropping, and as well as the trust of the customers being compromised. So for OpenText, we have solutions cutting across end-to-end in your security needs. So such as digital investigation and forensic, identity and access management, your endpoint detections and response, your information governance, risk and compliance, your data protections and backup and migrations, endpoint and network protections. What it really means, it means that from your end-to-end in terms of security and data protections, we actually have an end-to-end solutions which covers across some of these solutions such as OpenText Encase, Carbonites, which some of you are familiar with as well, your web roots, and as well as OpenText Identity. As a matter of fact, mentioned before, some of the solutions are award-winning. As you can see that our Encase forensic solutions have won the best forensic tools for the last 10 years. For most of the EDR cases and projects out there, 25% of them are using Encase solution, which is 1/4, 1 in every 4 projects are using our solution out there. Just very quickly again, breezing through and sharing you who OpenText is. We are a Canadian company. We've been around close to about 30 years now. We are delivering trust and quality solutions. We have more than 53 offices around the world. Obviously, for Southeast Asia, it's in Singapore. We have award-winning solutions, as I mentioned. We are also a great place to work in. We have more than 100 million end users and managing more than about 3 exabytes of our information there. So this is in a nutshell of our company. On top of that, if you look at from the world top 100 largest company, 89 of them are using OpenText. And if you break down by industry, of the top 20 largest company, most of them are using OpenText. And again, the reason being that we believe in delivering trust and quality solutions across. Not going to go through this, but this just give you a snapshot and give you an idea that the kind of specific industry solutions that we have across all the various industry. Happy to talk about it more. Happy to share about it more. Again, don't want to take up too much of time, but please do approach any of my colleagues sitting in your desk or Bounga, our partners, if you have any questions. I look forward to meeting you guys. I know that it's very difficult to mingle, but I really look forward to meet you in person. And if you have anything, please do come to me. Before I go, just want to wish everybody good health and obviously a wonderful event today. Once again, thank you.
Taking full advantage of the fact that I can now drop my mask because I'm speaking. This is going to be like mask ping pong. Okay, because apparently the rules for this are speaking, no mask, not speaking, mask back on. So the elastic on these masks could be under distinct pressure. So if you suddenly see someone grasping their face, it's not because they're completely overwhelmed with what's going on. It's purely and simply because their mask has broken. Good morning. I hope you all enjoyed the breakfast. And the feedback from my table, apart from the fact that several of them have taken jam with them. Okay. I'm not going to say which ladies it was. Okay.
Frank, do you mind to put your mask on the table? Just for the photo and the video, it look better. They remind me earlier.
I thought it was rather rakish with the mask hanging off the ear, but obviously not. I went to a wedding a couple of weeks ago, and the bride and groom were really, really worried. It was at the Park Royal on Pickering, and the bride and groom were really worried that their married life started off in a mask. And I cheered them up by saying, just think, in years to come, your grandchildren will be able to look at the pictures and say, oh, Grandpa, Grandma, you were wearing masks like we still do today. They were quite seriously disappointed. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed the breakfast, and thank you very much for attending yet again. And the feedback on my table was that, isn't it actually nice to be doing something outside again? Yes. It is, isn't it? Because all this working from home, as you say, I explained to you what a huge fan I am of it. And Randy also explained, Randy, I didn't think I said Wendy. Okay. Wendy. Maybe it's my inherent speech impediment, what I have. Okay.
It's me.
Yeah,
it's me.
Okay. Was it him?
It's me, Asian accent.
You know, I'm very sensitive, and I've been beating myself up over that. I couldn't eat my breakfast. And I don't know why you're all laughing. If you obviously haven't noticed that I'm sensitive, I think that's terrible. Okay, thank you very much. And we have here my good friend, Dr. Magdacelli, who is going to be with you and available for your questions. And hopefully I may have one or two questions. Ms. Anna Blezard, Mr. Michael Liu, and from Standard Chartered, Mr. Pravin Pandey. Okay, and they will be fielding some questions, and hopefully we're going to have a discussion. Now, this handheld microphone, I feel a bit like Freddie Mercury here. I'm going to obviously have to run up and down and climb up, and in a moment I will put my singlet on, which will be a sickening sight, and you've all just eaten breakfast. So obviously you'll all feel completely zapped out over that. Okay, so I'm going to turn this round because I don't know if I'm allowed to turn this round because you're now downwind of my COVID infection. But what I will do is if we can put the music on, we've got timing music with a metronome, and when it ticks, I will turn to one side and breathe. Okay? So apparently, as I say, the rules are that we can take the mask off when we speak, and sadly, I have no eyesight. So we're going to go and talk about these. I'd like to say that I'd learned this, but I haven't. Okay? Sadly, I wrote it, and you'd think I would have learned it, but again, I haven't. Okay. So as we spoke of before, and I sort of had a little backhanded swipe at Cisco, but I mean, I've got a lot of time for Cisco. They do good stuff, and one of the things they've said is the survey that Cisco have trumpeted and talked about very far and wide shows that 69% of the respondents in Southeast Asia reported a total increase in cyber attacks of over 25% since the onset of COVID. It was George Bernard Shaw, people often attribute it to Oscar Wilde, but it was George Bernard Shaw who said there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. So we got 69% of respondents report 25%. One of the things they didn't do is say how many people responded. Okay, so there could have just been 69, couldn't there? Okay, so they're the ones that have actually reported back. Now, Michael, one of the things, I already spoke to the panel, and I told them that I'm unashamedly going to be pointing fingers, because one of the things I don't want here in this chat session is for me to throw out a question and the panel all studiously put their heads down and don't answer. Okay, because that's going to be somewhat tedious, isn't it? So pointing the finger at Michael, and please feel free to pass on this. If you want a question on sport or science and nature, I have some here that we can use. Do you remember Trivial Pursuit? Okay, so Michael, one of the things that, looking at the Cisco thing, if digital transformation is accelerating these offences and these incidents, shall we say, and traditional cybersecurity approaches based on enterprises are to be encouraged. And people are actually being told to build proactive perimeters and improve their network security. How are we going to do that? You can demask.
Yeah. This is my unmute, so I have to unmute more.
You're unmuted now. I've got a mute, apparently.
So, unmute, mute. All right. Yeah. Hey, thanks for the question. Hi, I'm Michael. I hope it's not too loud. So I think it's very interesting because I come from the legal industry, Rajantan. So I'm running the Rajantan Technology, which is a legal tech arm. So we're involved in a lot of transformation project for the law firm, the legal industry. So one thing I realized that is a switch of mindset, right? So many years ago, when we come to the mindset of cybersecurity, it's always been very reactive. You know, we hope that it won't happen to us, but when we do get a cyber incident, then we react to it. Of course, nowadays, you know, that will never work, right? So as what Frank mentioned, now most organization has gone into the more proactive approach that it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when, right? So because of that, then they have invested a lot into endpoint security, invested a lot into consulting services, assessments, and so on. But even the proactive approach, especially during this sort of pandemic, it's not sufficient, you know. So if there's any takeaway from everyone here, I think I'm going to give you another tip. So you have your reactive, your proactive. So now the latest or the most important one is adaptive, right? So most organizations are saying that we are proactive, yes, but what can we do more? So the doing more is actually to adapt, to understand what is the events, the threats, to analyze that, you know. So it's also a preemptive measure. So if you know that every day you have all these threats coming to your organization, what else can you do to block it before an incident happened? Yeah, so I think that's sort of, without taking too much time, and then I'd like to get the other panel to share. So that's where I want to set the scene, that we have already reached from reactive to proactive and even to the adaptive stance in terms of cybersecurity for transformation.
Yeah, very helpful, and obviously to add another element, this adaptive as well. And you use that phrase, which we've seen a lot in Singapore, not if, but when. It's targeted at terrorist attacks, but some of these could actually be terrorist attacks anyway, couldn't they? When you think about it, remember my slide with the national-based, the nation-based hacking. Are we immune from that? Michael obviously has told us these from the legal side, and if he's from Michael's not a lawyer, you could tell that because you got the answer, as opposed to, on the other hand, which we would have got, and I apologise if I've insulted any lawyers in the audience. I'm from Liverpool, we're really good at insulting people, okay? And basically we tend to just water off a duck's back. Sitting next to Michael, we got Pravin, who's from Standard Chartered Bank, which again has a link with Liverpool. It's on the front of our shirts. And I noticed that Standard Chartered, I don't bank with Standard Chartered, but they've spent a lot of money on revamping their logo complete on the Liverpool shirts as well. And I'm glad I don't bank with you, because the BBC spent 13 million revamping their logo from the letters BBC in boxes to putting shadows around it. And Saatchi spent 13 million thinking of that. I could have done it for $47. Okay, if I could have thought of how to do it. But we've got Pravin. Pravin, I'm not expecting you to speak on behalf of Standard Chartered, because that would be most unfair, but you move in financial circles. That means he queues for the ATM. Okay, just to let you know. But just to ask you, what are you seeing in the financial world? Are people kind of running scared and taking their not if but when approach?
Yeah, I reckon it's actually absolute chaos, isn't it? I think in terms of the way that organizations have had to accelerate their technology transformation programs and everything else, I think a lot of organizations are still kind of grappling with that, right? And especially in the financial sector, it's not just the question of, let's identify a technology and let's go ahead and implement. There's a lot of regulatory repercussions, and there's a lot of regulatory consequences. You can't just go ahead as a financial institution. You can't just go ahead and decide, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to implement it, right? There has to be a whole bunch of committees, and I think from the financial sector perspective as well, it's not so much just the organization, but it's also kind of managing the fact that the customers and clients of the financial institutions are also very, very vulnerable and very open to scams, and just that side of security as well has to be really thought about, right? And banks are really grappling with all of that. I mean, it's not just internal, but it's also externally, how customers are dealing with them, whether they're being cheated. I mean, there have been instances, and I'm pretty sure that all of you have seen the news where customers are walking into banks and just withdrawing millions and millions of dollars, and it just disappears. And as a financial institutions have to do their due diligence, right? They have to do their due diligence and make sure that they kind of try to keep the money inside and try to do the best for their customers. But if a customer requests for it, can't do much about it. Yeah,
If I can unashamedly pick on you again, Pravin.
Sure.
One of the things that struck me, and again, I preface this by saying not just Standard Chartered, the banks over the last few years have moved away from building-based activity where you go to the bank. It wasn't that long ago where people say, I'm going to the bank. Nowadays, you go to the bank if you need to withdraw cash. A lot of people I know don't actually carry cash. I mean, the Queen has been doing it for years. She never carries cash. But most people now are becoming like the Queen, and they don't carry cash. So you would go to the bank. Were the banks more or less prepared, do you think, for the working from home concept? Because they devolved away from people being in venues.
Yeah, I guess if you look at it from that perspective, I guess financial institutions were kind of prepared for that. And I mean, with the advent of digital banking and everything else as well, I mean, that Singapore has actually gone into the area where licenses are being issued, right, or licenses have been issued to organizations. And I think for a long time, a lot of us have been very used to mobile banking, digital banking, like all of that has actually been there. So what you're asking, Frank, is really kind of, again, two areas, right? It's how the bank is prepared internally and how the bank is prepared for its clients and its customers, right? So on the client and customer side, I think they've been generally prepared for quite some time now. Most of the financial institutions out there have always had a mobile or digital banking platform, which has been relatively secure. They try as best as they can to make it as secure as possible. I think from the internal side of things as well, it's really just kind of adapting to the new ways of work and allowing staff to, continue working the way they have, and provide authentication measures or whatever else, in just that I guess remote working environment. And again, I think generally most financial institutions, from what I've seen, and from colleagues that I've spoken to, they have been generally quite prepared, but again, it still was quite an acceleration.
It clearly wasn't always the case because, and I like living here, right? Okay, so I'm not going to mention which government department it was, but I had to make during the first lockdown. It sounds like during the Ice Age, doesn't it? But during the first lockdown period, I had to make an appointment with a department in Singapore which takes money off you. Okay, there's many, obviously, but I had to make, so I made an appointment, and when I got there, everything was great, except there was nobody there. There were people on the question counter, on the information counter, but once you wanted to go beyond, I need to do this, and I actually need to pay you money, it was like, oh. And it was almost as though, like I said, the banks had become used to it. It was almost as though this thing, and it clearly was dropped on people out of the blue, wasn't it? That we've got to do this and we've got to work from home. And like the instance over, I said, with the company with the laptops, they just gave them and didn't give them any software. They didn't give them any wherewithal to do anything. And this government organisation, it was like, oh, okay, let's work from home because we've got to. And then suddenly it's like, yeah, but we'll have our frontline staff and they'll be there. And let's tell people make an appointment. And when they make an appointment, it was Cicero, wasn't it? And said, now that we're organised, what should we do? And they sort of made the rules and then suddenly thought, but there's no infrastructure to back it up. Okay, so you're not here to listen to me. Magda, you come from an insurance background at the moment. I know you always haven't. Magda has had a very varied career. And one of the things that she is in now is she's in an arena which deals with risk. Are you seeing the details put out by Cisco? Are you seeing those reflected in what's happening in claims and what's going on there? She's not an insurance agent, so nobody approach her later.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Let me just clarify perhaps where I come from. So I'm the head of cyber advisory for Marsh Asia. And Marsh Asia is a risk management company and, of course, a broking company as well. So there is a part of insurance, but It's not the only part. So I am from the risk management now within this role. And that allowed me to see and discover a lot of companies during, especially the last few months, in situations where they have been obliged to change. And I really like what Michael said, adaptability. They were not actually prepared for that. And they needed to adapt and basically adopt as well this technology very fastly in order to continue business. Like you said, you can't just have an empty office. You need to have a back-end technology that will support that. So what actually I can say from the many interviews that I had is that those companies, from the financial industry to the shipping to the manufacturing, again, needed to take on board new ways of working, which actually were taken as a priority before talking about security and privacy. And what does it actually mean? Of course, it means that things were there available to be for the customers, for the employees, but they were not secured accordingly. And this is, again, we have seen that in all industries across Asia. And no matter of the size of the company, no matter of the industry, the activities, they were taken off guard. And of course, what does it mean? We mean a change of perimeter, which actually disappeared. So you asked the question, Frank, about what the perimeter, and how we should take the security. What happened is that there's no perimeter anymore. Companies are working with employees from home. Like, I really like the slide where you say, am I working at home or am actually living at work? So the same applies for companies. And if you don't have a perimeter anymore as a company, how are you able to apply the same standards or security controls that you had previously and expect the same result? There is a say that says if you do the same things again and again, expect a different result. That's craziness, right? So if you expect as well to do the same, but your situation as a company changed, of course, the result will not be the same. And again, this aspect that led to a non-perimeter environment of the company changed one aspect that's extremely important, the attack surface. And the attack surface of a company is all the entry points that will allow a cyber criminal to get in. And that might be applications, software, Internet of Things, industrial control systems for manufacturing or shipping. That can be unsecured cloud instances, which very often is perceived that it comes with a security by default. Well, it doesn't. Every single technology will have emerging risk with it. And it is extremely important for a company to understand those and adapt towards a shared responsibility model where they need to implement controls by themselves. So 2 points, basically, as an answer to your question, Frank. I'm diverted a little bit. But the first point is it's a shared responsibility. So whatever the company adopts, there is security controls that needs to be taken in consideration. Nothing comes security bulletproof. And the second point is we do not have a perimeter anymore. So how do you address that? How is your company addressing that with employees working from home or from anywhere, a quarantine hotel? So there is a lot of aspect that changed. And again, we're coming back to the adaptability.
Okay, we've seen from 3 of our panelists so far, and no pressure on you, Anna, because we've seen lots of what should we do, what should we do, what should we do? And now we're going to hand this over to Anna, who's going to tell us exactly what we're going to do. As I say, no pressure. But we've talked about, Magda just said before that the perimeters, and it's an age-old joke, isn't it? What's the weakest link? What's the weakest component? What's the most dangerous part of a car? The nut that holds the steering wheel. Okay, not the actual nut, the nut that's driving the car. So we're talking about people working from home and people within perimeters. So what can we do, Anna, in your opinion, and feel free, obviously, to pass this to your learned colleagues. What can we do, in your opinion, to enhance the human aspect of cybersecurity? Because they're not there. You can't target these people. So what are you going to do to enhance the human element?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And, you know, you can have all the security in place, you can have all the controls, but ultimately, a lot of the time, especially when we're talking about these cyber attacks, it comes down to the humans and the human element. So we've got, and I loved some of the slides that you had up earlier, you know, about the working from home and seeing kind of some of the pressures that now you've got employees under in this environment at home. So I think you had the working mother who'd tied up the 3 kids on the floor trying to do a conference call. Now, you know, that's funny, but actually you've got a number of these employees now who are working from home. They're distracted. I think, Frank, again, earlier you said that, you know, you're thinking about doing the laundry, or, you know, now I've got to like move the laundry outside. And yeah, that's funny, but, you know, you're trying to do your work, you're distracted. You know, let's look at, you know, one of the biggest issues at the moment is around phishing. You know, you get these bogus emails. We were talking about that earlier. And our organization, we're seeing a big uptick in things like BEC scams, you know, and all it takes is, you know, emails are getting increasingly sophisticated. It takes a distracted employee to suddenly, you know, click, and there you go. You've got, you know, you've now got a vulnerability in the system. These workers also, you know, most people working from home are actually doing more hours than they were previously. Again, I think we alluded to conference calls and having to do conference calls at, you know, 1 a.m. in the morning, 3 a.m. in the morning. You're tired, you're distracted, and that's when people make mistakes. And I think the other thing we talked about as well was how nice it is to come and do activities like this. Why is that? Because you suddenly get to have that engagement. So employee engagement is also a big part of this. Training, yes, for sure, but actually having that engagement with people so that they feel part of the organization. If you're in an office environment and you get, say this, let's stick with phishing for now, but you get some kind of phishing email, previously you might turn around to your colleague and say, oh, I think this is a bit odd. Like, what do you think? Have you got it? That doesn't happen anymore. You're at home on your own. You're making that decision as to whether you're just going to delete that, put it in the junk. You know, are you going to escalate that to IT? Or, you know, are you so distracted you suddenly like click on an attachment and you've got that issue. So I think that's also a big part of this as well. Other things you can do around the human element, aside from kind of the training and the engagement, something that we do is, you know, regular kind of communications. I just opened up my email this morning, and we have a cybersecurity team at FDI, and they send monthly emails about latest attacks and things. Now, it's really interesting, and it's actually you've got those articles to read, but that enforces more understanding about what's going on, but in a more interesting way than kind of annual trainings that you can have. Other issues, obviously, you know, around the more technical side. Passwords, you know, trying to remember all your passwords for all your different applications, etc. But there are various techniques, and, you know, we have certain parameters whereby, you know, your password has to be a certain number of length, different characters, no proper words, etc. You know, and instilling that into individuals as well is really important, because I think it's all very well. It depends on which organization you're working for. You know, in my line of business, we're used to advising people on these issues, but there are many other companies whereby, you know, it's not part of the day to day. So ensuring that you can do that and you've got that engagement is also really key when it comes to this.
It's interesting that you raised the issue of peer reassurance there, because just turning round to the people behind you and saying, is this okay? But now we haven't got that. And people don't people are not naturally assertive. People won't call somebody up and say, hey, I got this weird email, or this email asking us to do this. Are we all okay? Oh yeah, it's something IT are doing. But we don't do that now. And you've got to make a decision. And people often aren't equipped for that. Magda, are you looking to come in on this? I mean, it's a discussion, so please.
Yeah, definitely, Frank. First of all, I am so suspicious of emails that I got email from our security saying, no, this is a legitimate email, click on it. So, you know, it's good always to remember that internet doesn't have trust. It hasn't been built with embedded trust, and therefore you never know who's behind the screen and sending the email. But I would like actually to add on the very good insights of Anna is that whenever we're talking about phishing and employees clicking on links, there is something very important that I realized within the conversation that I had with clients that is missed. Basically, the thought that the antivirus or anti-malware will be there to stop it, or somehow magically the IT will realize that they clicked on the link and they will be able to stop it as well. Now, first of all, that's not the case, because if they click on a link, probably they will either enter the credentials or there's something will be installed that is a malicious software. Now, the malicious software, which we commonly call malware, is not always detected by your security tools. It depends of how it has been built and how it is actually as well prepared to circumvent the security controls of that particular company, especially if it's a targeted attack. So in terms of numbers, for example, we have 300,000 new malwares per day. That's huge. Why? Because cyber criminals are realizing how profitable it is to do cybercrime, and they spend time and money to develop this malware. And now, in addition of the fact that we have a lot of new variants of malware, including ransomware, which is becoming very popular, we as well have techniques of obfuscation, or basically bypassing security controls of the company. And those are very well known. It's not like it's a hidden secret. We can Google them and find information about how to bypass security controls of your company. And therefore, here I would like to add that 2 points again. I'm keeping it to 2 points. First of all, again, the awareness is one aspect, but employees need as well to understand that if they click on a link or open an attachment, it's actually they did it, not the IT did it. And therefore, they have a shared responsibility. I'm coming back to the same point, shared responsibility. And the second point, there's no security tools that are 100% able to detect everything. So you need, as a company, to always consider a failure as well of security controls. And how do you react to that?
It's quite funny because the World Wide Web was 30 years old last week. That's it, 30 years old. It's only been around for 30 years. And yet, from our point of view, we think it's been there forever. But I take my learned dissertation on this from the Channel 4 TV show in the UK, the IT Crowd. And what Magda said is, somebody will be doing this. And what they did in the IT Crowd, the elders of the internet, some were sitting on a cloud. That's an IT word, cloud, which just is someone else's computer. Okay? So somewhere sitting on a cloud in the sky with the divine entity are the elders of the internet. And they are protecting me when I'm at home. There are no elders of the internet. Often within your organization, your IT security group are run off their feet, and they're sort of saying, well, even though you're not in the office and you're not able to see the poster we put on the wall, we're not able to have peer reassurance, we're not able to drill into you, don't do this, don't do this. We're sort of trusting to your common sense. That's a kind of big mistake, isn't it? Because look at me, my common sense extends as far as it's raining, I've got to bring the laundry in. And I work in this industry. I mean, yeah, even last week I got a variation on the Nigerian letter fraud scam, where a lady in the United States, she's probably a gentleman in Port Elizabeth, Nigeria, but this lady in the United States wrote to me and said that her husband had died and had had a refund from the IRS in the US. Well, that's immediately suspicious because the IRS take money, they never give money back. Okay, so he'd had a refund of $20-odd million, and she actually put in the email, I guess I'm helping you asking you to help me launder this money. So as I said, I sent her Pravin's credit card number, which I always do. I mean, it works quite well. Is it working good for you? It's working fine for me. Yeah, it's no problem at all. He didn't even know I had his credit card number. He just lent it me for a little while. Moving on a little bit, we've talked about, and we heard the expression there, the attack surface. We're all full of buzzwords. It just means a bigger area. The cloud is someone else's computer, and then an attack surface is just a bigger risk. The risk is spread out. So Michael, often we get in organizations, the IT department, the network security, the security department, and how often do we see that they're all kind of pulling in different directions? And we see that they don't function in the same way. And each department often reports to a different reporting entity. And sometimes their objectives are completely different. And their performance is based on that. So how are we going to fix that, Michael? Based here, we're now the elders of the internet. And we're going to fix this. We've got an hour, no problem. So how
No pressure. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a very good question. And I think that's the reality of it. You know, you have all departments running all in different directions. So, and the reality of it is there's no one clear way to pull everyone together. But there's an exercise that we did, which seemed to be quite effective, is what we call a tabletop exercise. So we jump straight to the management and say, let's simulate what's when you get a cyber attack. You know, simulate the real incident and see how each department reacts with each other and where your gaps are, you know. And you'll be very surprised, you know, because usually when it comes to an attack or, you know, a serious incident, I say, who's your executive in chief, you know, so who makes the shot? So especially in Asian companies or in Singapore, it must be the most senior person, the chairman, the chief executive, right? But they are the worst people to be in charge when it comes to a cyber crisis, right? So when you do a tabletop exercise, which means we simulate an actual attack and get various departments to react to it, then you can clearly see where the gaps are and who should be making the decisions and, you know, how they should work together. So I think the more they have this simulation, then they will know, they will have a better understanding of the role. And I think I just want to add to Magna's point is, we talk about a lot of times companies rely too much on technology to solve their cybersecurity problem, but they fail to realize that technology is just one element of it. Of course, there's the people element, like what we discussed. So for the people to understand it, the best way is to show them how it works or how it should not work. So that's a simulation. But the third and the most powerful tool they have in the arsenal, which is the least used, is the policy or processes. I've come across some cases where there is phishing email, but nowadays the phishing emails are very sophisticated. It's what you call social engineering. So the attacker will be in your system for many months. So they understand the context between the financial, let's say the financial executive and the big boss, which is a bit demanding. So one day he will simulate an email from the big boss and say, I want you to transfer this amount to my account, right? Don't ask question, urgent, right? So, and this very timid financial executive will just do it because she has always been taking instructions through the email chain, which the attacker has been sort of studying, right? So, but you can have a policy. So I say, why do you change payment without making a phone call? So companies can set policies whenever there's money involved or change of payment method, you must have a phone call. If not, no transfer, you know? So I think these things are important. You can't just rely on technology, you know? You also need to have the policy element to it to enforce it. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to give a bit of insight actually. So yeah, to your point, you know, that's really great. You definitely need those policies, but people also need to understand what to do in practice, which is what you're saying there. So, for example, there was a scam that we're recently working on, very similar to Michael, what you were talking about, you know, in the email system, you know, and they did think about the policy, and they did think, well, yes, I've been asked to change payment details, so I should probably speak to the person. So what they did though is then the individual that the hacker that they are corresponding with said, oh, here you go, here's my phone number. So then they phoned up and they phoned the number, but they're phoning up and speaking to the fraudster because what they hadn't done, which according to the policy and best practice, is to look independently in the system to find that person's phone number and phone that number that's in the system, not the one that's in the email. You know, so again, it comes to, yes, definitely the policies, but really understanding what that means. I know I need to phone somebody. How am I going to do that? Okay, I'm going to get that phone number independently.
And surprisingly, they approve it when you call them. Surprisingly, you call the hacker who wants the money, and they
Shocking.
approve it. Yeah. but we see Magda's aching to come in here, but we're just telling her. But as we've seen even over the last couple of years, people will say, transfer this money to my bank account. But actually it happens for real, doesn't it? And the boss will say, transfer the money to the bank account. And how many times have we seen companies in Singapore transfer that money? And the next thing, it's a bit more difficult now. He's on a flight to Shanghai or somewhere, and the money's gone. We've seen several cases over the last couple of years where transfer me $8 million, and suddenly, by the way, I'll be in Shanghai for the next ever. And they've gone. And we're seeing it's harder now to do, but you can still travel to China. And of course, now we're going to be able to travel to those hotbeds of financial crime of Germany and Brunei. Okay, if you go to Brunei, it's very risky because you can get pineapple juice poisoning. Okay, but your liver will survive, but you'll just get pineapple juice poisoning. Magda, you're dying to come in.
Yes, I am, because I think, what we discuss here about people doing something, even trying to follow the policy, is actually bringing the same point that I mentioned at the beginning. There is a trust that exists by default from the users in the internet and in the identity behind that email. Like, the identity is not linked to the physical person, but there is somehow this perception from the user that it is, that behind that screen is the same person. But no, it's a digital identity that can represent anyone. And I like to do this on my Zoom calls when I talk about it. I change my name to Britney Spears and I turn off the camera and put the picture. And I'm saying who I am now. How do you know it's really me? You don't know. Whoever is behind the screen can be anyone. And that's actually, I think, the message that we need to bring to our users, to our employees. And over time, of course, which the sharing of the new ways of how the cyber criminals are attacking and compromising companies in a, I would say, simple way, it will raise the awareness. But if they are not aware about the new techniques, they will not understand how that can happen, and they will just follow the policy, but not reaching the objective or managing the goal. And last point, again, that I actually wanted to mention is, we talk about passwords, but I mean, how many of you Googled, for example, to find out if your emails have been breached or have been part of a data breach? I see if you, okay. So if you didn't do it, it's a great exercise to understand that probably everyone in this room has been part of a data breach at some point of time, which means that if you are reusing that password someone else, what cyber criminals do is that they find that email, the password, and then they look you up. Okay, you're probably using Office 365. Let me try that. If you don't have MFA, I'm in. Simple. So again, think from a perspective of cyber criminals being criminals using technology and trying to be innovative. And I like to say criminals are as well going through a digitalization. So that's exactly what's happening.
I mean, the whole idea of the person behind the scheme. Week before last, I spoke to Jamie Tubbs, who's the VP of training for Magnet Forensics. Jamie was telling me he did an online class, and he was listed to deliver this online class in network intrusion. And he actually went online and introduced himself, didn't give any excuse, and said, "My name is Mark Juan." Okay, Mark Juan. But he gave his name as Juan. And just taught the class for 2 days, and nobody in the class, and these were law enforcement and security executives, nobody queried, how come Jamie's not doing the class? It was Jamie. But after 2 days, he said to them, by the way, why has nobody asked me why I give a different name? And one of the guys came on and said, no, you're doing this class because Jamie couldn't come because he's sick. Nobody had said that. They wove a story around it that he was unable to come. We talk about conferences. If you ever have the occasion to call Jamie, he takes calls at home, and Jamie's very good. I criticized Americans before, but Jamie's very good. He will take calls within our time. If you call him, he has lots of dead animals on his wall. He lives in Texas, and he has the heads of dead animals on his wall. And it's very distracting, because you're talking to him about something, you're thinking, what kind of animal is that? Why has he shot a guinea pig? Why has he got a guinea pig's head mounted on the wall? But going over from the human side, Pravin, we were talking about relying on technology, and we've heard things before about using AI and machine learning. Where do you think the place of that is? Because if we can make mistakes, AI and machine learning and technology will never make mistakes, right?
No, that's definitely not the case, right? So I mean, look, the criminals are obviously using all these technologies as well, and this actually goes to something that you taught me very early in my career, Frank. Yeah, you don't remember. You might not remember this, but so for those of you who don't know, Frank was actually one of my first trainers when it came to digital forensics when I did it many moons ago. And one of the things that he told me was that with the advent of technology, or every time a new technology comes out into the market, the first people who use it best and in the most comprehensive way possible are the criminals. Right, so when you talk about AI and machine learning and everything else, you know for a fact that there are malicious actors out there who are using all these technologies, right? So when it comes to the side of law enforcement and the defenders and basically your IT teams and everything else, it is something as well that definitely has to be used, right? I think the one thing that people don't really understand about AI and ML is that you think it's a solution to everything else, but you need the gray matter. You need the human being there to be able to still model it out. You still need someone there to look at what analysis is coming out of it, right? There is still a human element that needs to be included in all sorts of machine learning, right? I know there is a differentiation between supervised and unsupervised and everything else, but for it to be implemented to begin with, a human being has to be involved. There is always going to be a human element somewhere that needs that. So it really then, I guess, goes to the point of how well this person is actually trained in that specific software or in that specific, modeling, and how organizations actually choose to then implement that according to how their enterprise is set up, right? So that's where data governance is actually really important.
Yeah, one of the things, just give me 1 second, Magda. One of the things that also Pravin said about teaching things, the reason why criminals are the first to pick this up is I used to be in the police, and if we wanted anything, we had to make 56 different separate applications to 56 different people to get it. Criminals don't have to. Criminals just go out and buy it. You see the queue outside the Apple shop every time some new gizmo comes out. And these aren't police who are buying this for investigative purposes and law enforcement and the good guys. These are people who want this as a toy in Singapore, but also the bad guys could be in the queue as well. I went to an open text conference in Canada, and a gentleman from Scotland talked about careers and jobs which are doomed by machine learning and AI. And he said people who are hairdressers, people who are plumbers, people who mend your roof, they're fine, because you can't teach AI to climb up a ladder, go on the roof and fix the tiles on the roof. You can't tell it to fix a leak in your plumbing. It can diagnose it, but it can't fix it. If you go to the barbers and a robot comes out, you go to some of the malls in Singapore and you see these cleaning robots. How many times have you been run over by them? They're supposed to clean the floor, but you sort of dodge around them, and it's like some dance that you're doing. You move, and they move with you instead of moving away from you. So do we rely on them? And one of the things, going back to the original point, one of the things I always teach is in investigations in IT and cybersecurity investigations, there's always got to be a human element. There is no big red button on any tool that says find all evidence and fix it. So we rely, in the same way we rely on the humans to screw it up, and pardon my vulgar expression, we also rely on the humans to fix it. Because yes, we can see that the things generated, the lady who sent me the message asking me to help her to money launder, I mean, she sent that out, but at some point when she realizes that money, she's going to need some human element to take it. Otherwise, there's just a big feeling of satisfaction, and it's like, whew, I got that money, but I can't do anything with it.
Well, yeah, the other thing that you taught me, Frank, is that everyone is guilty until proven innocent.
Mm-hmm. That's right. He turned that round, if you didn't notice. They're all innocent until proven guilty, but being a cynical, bitter, twisted copper, my view is they're all guilty. When I was a uniform copper, one of my colleagues got a message. Policemen, they have jury trials in the UK, and policemen, for some reason, are not allowed to sit on a jury because they're all guilty, right? So policemen wouldn't be allowed to sit on a jury. But one of the guys, his wife was called up to the jury service, and she said to this guy, Dave, I'm on jury service and I won't be able to discuss the cases with you. And this guy, this cop who worked with me said, just remember one thing, they're all guilty. Okay, and basically our healthy, cynical attitude. Magda's sitting waiting here patiently to come in, but maybe she's lost the will to live now. Okay.
No, I still remember what I wanted to comment just on the artificial intelligence and the machine learning, because I've seen so many solutions or vendors, and no offense for anyone selling AI or ML, but basically claiming, oh, buy our solution, it will predict your future as a company, it will predict the future incident. And one question they say, but where do you get the data from? How do you predict something if you don't have historical data? And you are not using someone else's data to predict my future, right? Because that they cannot, especially in cybersecurity. So for example, the same applies in a practical example of security incident. We're gonna predict the security incident in the future that might affect your company. Well, you need a database and historical view of your own data. So if your company doesn't have that streamlined, centralized, that the tool can use, well, they cannot predict anything from nothing, right? So I definitely recommend everyone, when you have these new technologies or tools that come up, to ask the right questions. And always remember, there is a lot of things that you can say in marketing, but it's marketing. So ask the right questions when it comes to the deployment. There's no magical tool that will fix everything for you. That doesn't exist. I think so. Or maybe someone is already building it, but I didn't see that yet.
Did you see the movie of the Tesla car last week?
I was about to mention that.
The door opened and it hit a London bus. So Teslas drive themselves, and these gull-wing doors that they have, the ones that open up on top, and it hit a London bus. If it's that good, why didn't it detect the London bus? And why didn't it tell the driver, your door is open? If you get in a Comfort City cab here, the driver knows that you haven't closed the door properly. Well, Comfort City cab Hyundais are probably a little cheaper than Teslas, and yet the Tesla didn't detect the London bus. So I feel totally happy driving along in a driverless car. Yeah, and I don't think. I mean, we're looking at this now, and we're also looking at as a new arena. We're seeing people hacking, and then suddenly saying, oh, I'm hacking like a mountaineer climbing a mountain because it's there. And I'm doing this, and I didn't really want anything. I didn't really want to gain anything, so I'll give you all the money back. And if you offer me a reward for doing this, I don't want the reward, and it's fine, and everything's great. So throwing this out to all of you, recently, and I apologize if I don't know how to pronounce this, but there was an IT firm, Kaseya, in the US, Kaseya, who were hacked. And they were involved in the SolarWinds hack as well. And they're now saying, oh, anybody who has been subject to an attack and has ransomware, we're going to give you a trusted key free of charge so that you can unlock your ransomware files. Anna, any such thing as a free ransomware lunch or a free ransomware key?
Well, I got some free jam earlier, but no.
She's now admitted the jam. See, Eve broke down under cross-examination.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. See? It's not just me.
The conference was rubbish. The jam was great. Okay.
Short answer, no, definitely not. I think, if we look at this case in particular, I think the company, they've come out, they haven't said whether or not they've paid a ransom at this point. They've got this magic key, and I think there are various ideas out there as to how they could have got that. So one is, maybe they did pay the ransom, or maybe a group of the victims came together to pay the ransom, because actually it ended up impacting a number of small and medium enterprises. I think, 800 to 1,000 enterprises were ultimately impacted by this particular attack. So maybe they got that. Another theory is that the Kremlin somehow got hold of the key, and that they passed it to an intermediary who was then given it to the company. Or maybe, the hackers just gave them the key for free, which is not as kind of unusual as that may sound. It's not totally unprecedented, and we've definitely seen some other attacks whereby actually the hackers have subsequently been offered a job by the company. So, to that extent, whether or not money exchanged hands, I don't know. We don't know. Whether we'll ever know, I don't know. But in terms of the cost and the impact behind such an attack, it's very costly. So if we look at the company itself, they need to, launch an investigation. They need to understand how this has happened. They need to do an assessment, a root cause analysis. They need to, shut things down quickly in order to make sure that, no further data is going to be lost. So you've got all that kind of absolute immediate impact that there is to the company, and depending on the issue, sometimes you can't operate. And you look at the wider victims. So in this instance, you've got 800 plus companies that are impacted by this. The financial implications for those companies, again, if they can't operate, they can't make money. That is, very difficult to quantify. Depends how long it goes on. They've also got to do their own threats. You've got insurance. So, if you've got insurance for this, you're going to have to make sure that you've undertaken a thorough investigation. You may need to get independent consultants to come in to do that analysis and understand what has happened. We're not even got into the costs that could be involved with the regulator, for example, regulatory fines, depending on what has happened. The reputational impact, that's really, really difficult to quantify. So, we talked about the immediate financial impact if you can't operate. But if people don't trust you anymore, you're going to lose your current clients. You're not going to get new clients. Quantifying that is very, very challenging. Then you've got, the need to update, to change, etc. So a free lunch? I don't think so.
It was quite funny because one of the other things that they started offering as well, we'll offer you a reward if you hack us and if you give us the ransomware key. And like password, maybe the key is key. Right, okay. And then they also offered, which caused some reaction in the US, and also you won't be prosecuted. And the only quote that came out of the FBI after that was, they can't say that. The only people who can guarantee immunity from prosecution is the Department of Justice, which the FBI is part of. And the FBI actually made a quote that they'd been a stony silence before that. But after that, it was you can't have a get out of jail free card. You may go to jail. But obviously catching them is another issue. Anna, did you want to come back in? Or?
No, I think.
Go on, Magda.
Again,
Just looking sheepish and guilty here. But from a moderator's point of view, someone's got to talk. I was worried that this would be four people just sitting here looking kind of, and being totally stony silent. But go ahead, please.
I can talk about cybersecurity for hours, so someone needs to stop me at some point.
You won't go to jail if you talk about this one.
But no, coming back on this case of suppliers compromise, I think I look at it from the perspective, again, of cyber criminals looking at scalability. I want to hack as many companies as possible in as short term or time as possible. So I make as much money as possible. And what's the best way? Use an IT vendor. Perfect. They compromise their solution or their product, and then instead of hacking one company, I hack 800 or 1,000. And then, of course, as Anna mentioned, the impact is tremendous. And therefore, the financial gain from that is as well. Now, what happens in ransomware attacks, which again, ransomware comes from ransom malware. So it's basically the cyber criminals blocking access to the systems and asking for an amount of money, is that the negotiation about that ransom is as well very similar to a traditional physical ransom negotiation. And you might have intermediaries in between the company that got compromised and the cyber criminal. And some of those companies that are negotiated, they end up paying the ransom. So the company didn't pay it. And they are not lying when they say they did not pay. They paid IT services with the vendor who paid the ransom. So again, you need to think about it from a cyber criminal perspective. Now, the implications when something like this happens definitely leads to a business interruption that might be devastating for the business, and especially when we talk about an IT provider. But that's an immediate consequence that we can understand. When we quantify cyber risk at Marsh, we look at direct and indirect costs. And direct costs might, as Anna very well mentioned, loss of profit, loss of, for example, costs related to forensic investigation, third parties, any other direct costs related to that particular incident. And again, it also comes down to the business. If your business doesn't operate for a certain number of days, your CFO knows how much it will lose money. So the same, plus, of course, all the IT costs related to the recovery, response, over time, third-party consulting companies, like Anna mentioned. And now it comes as well to the costs that are not direct, loss of shares value, loss of market share and customers over time, which also are actually things that are quantifiable to a certain degree. It is definitely challenging, but it is quantifiable. The same way how you build a company, like for example, when you start a startup, the investors will tell you how much your company is valued as. And what you do might be completely intangible, but there are economical formulas that allow you to value intangible assets. And that's how we quantify those costs. Loss of customers, loss of reputation, those are examples of intangibles as well as any intellectual property, and those can be, to a certain degree, given a financial value. And when you have that visibility, you understand, okay, when that happens, those are the financial consequences, and therefore, that's how much I need to consider to invest, or eventually to transfer to an insurance, or have a balance between both. So it's all about having that visibility. And again, coming back to the fact that cyber criminals are criminals with technology. So they think and they act as such.
Okay, it's hugely valuable, but we're putting problem. Let's put, I asked Anna to give us the answer and the solution before, so let's get Pravin's take, because Pravin wears two hats as well as his day job. He's also the current president of the High Tech Crime Investigation Association, and part of their functionality, correct me if I'm wrong, is an educational, because you educate. So where are we going to educate people, and what are we going to educate people in to do? Starting, so it's over to you now. We've all failed, so educate us.
Okay, so that's a really, really interesting question, Frank. And it was just last week, actually. So I have quite a bit of friends who are in the Ministry of Education. And we kind of got to this topic as well because it's just generally always prevalent, right? And generally, I guess when it comes to cybersecurity and these sort of topics, is the sort of thing that you will generally only start encountering or being really familiar with at a post-secondary, a tertiary level, right? You get introduced to all these concepts and you start understanding a little bit more about it. And that's also only if you actually get into that specific field, right? If you choose to do a cybersecurity diploma, or if you choose to do something, even vaguely related to computing. And we got into this really, really interesting debate about how kids today, and not just, kids and adults and everybody else, we are really, really, and bear with me on this, okay? Because I know it's a very, I got a lot of flack for kind of suggesting it. But kids today and everybody, there's no getting away from technology. There's no getting away from cybersecurity. There's no getting away from awareness of malicious acts. There's just no getting away from it, right? But the thing is, because, and like Frank said, it's only been 30 years for the introduction of the World Wide Web, but we're right at the start of the computing age, right? This is where everything is developing. And my personal belief is that education, and when it comes to education, I think it should start at the lowest levels. It should start in primary school, right? Foundationally, kids learn English, maths, science. I mean, how many of you still, use biology and remember what the parts of a flower are, right? do you actually use that? But you
I
still,
use them as my passwords.
you actually still learn that, don't you? From a foundational level, you learn all of that because you don't know what you might be doing at a tertiary or a post-secondary level, right? And children these days are so exposed to so much technology and everything else. I think, or my personal belief, is that technology should become a foundational subject, right? People smarter than me will be able to write the syllabus and try to, but we have so many programs for kids, like coding for kids, like there's, cyber awareness sessions for this. I know there's great associations out there. So the HTCIA, we try to provide a lot of knowledge to our members, but there are associations out there that actually engage with children, but it's done on a very sporadic, very ad hoc basis. It's once in a while, oh, okay, let me come in and talk to you about cybersecurity. And the kids go, oh, I get to play around with computers. They're playing games in the back, but they're exposed, right? Children are really, really exposed to all of this, and they are ill-equipped. And when they become adults, they'll become even more ill-equipped. Right?
A couple of years ago, Pravin and I were invited to NUS. Do you remember?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and we had to do a presentation, and the students there had had a full 2-semester module on IT investigations and IT security, and they used forensic tools. They had licenses for forensic tools to do this. And one of the things I decided to do, and in hindsight probably wasn't a good idea, I actually dummied up a real homicide investigation which had a computer element into it. And we had the gory pictures with blood on the floor and all the rest of it. And 2 guys who were illicit lovers fell out, one killed the other one. Right, and that's the story in a nutshell. And I sat them down. We're sitting in this lecture hall at NUS, and I actually gave them the information that we had. And my question to them was, "Where do you start?" And the answer was exactly the answer I've just got from there. It was deafening, the silence, wasn't it? Pravin just laughed, and he was like, was that a really good idea? And the answer was no. So again, being a shy, retiring type like I am, I chivied them along and said, so what are you going to look at? You can't just sit here and admire the computer and say, oh, this is a lovely colour. It's not going to work. So where are we going to look? And we're teaching now, and I feel this quite strongly, that there's a gap between the syllabus, which is theoretically based, and bluntly, in some cases, equips them for nothing. Because where are you going to start? There is no big red button that says, find me all the evidence, write a report, and take them to court. It just doesn't work. And also, if you're investigating, and Magda's alluded to this, where do you start? And we're not going to always have the situation where we're bringing people up. We've recently recruited from the polytechnic level an intern within our company. And I hate to say this, but the standard of people that we interviewed was abysmal. And I don't use the word in a cavalier fashion. It was abysmal. One of the questions during an interview, they've done a diploma in IT. One of the questions was, can you name a file system? And the answer came back, Office 365, which I was a bit baffled at because I hadn't realized that was a file system. Obviously, my version must be Office 364, which is the cheaper version. And then based on that, hot on the heels was, well, can you name for me an operating system which sits on top of the file system? And straight away, this young Bill Gates came back with, yeah, Microsoft Word. Which again, I was a bit baffled at. We're getting to the stage, where's my MC here, hovering around? How are we doing for time? Because I've...
You have 6 more minutes.
Okay, so we've got 6 more minutes before Q&A. But this has gone, I was slightly concerned that we would actually get to a total silence here. But again, as I say, and we have to remember that we're not talking about a third world nation, a developing nation here. We're talking about Singapore. And we're talking about tertiary education in Singapore. And as Pravin says, I totally agree that the kids should be exposed to IT security and learn IT security from the get-go. That's a horrible American expression, from the beginning. Okay? Because Kids are using this. It's not like a case of, oh, if you're really good on Tuesday night, you can have 20 minutes on the computer. Kids are computing left, right, and center. Kids here were exposed for almost a year learning from home and doing this on computers. What would we have done in this pandemic if 30 years ago there wasn't a World Wide Web and in 1981 IBM hadn't invented the PC? Would we have had mainframes installed in everybody's house and we all log on to the ARPANET? That probably isn't going to work. Magda is ready to go again. Magda's going to tell me she's solved education and she's going to obviously pitch this, that she's going to educate every kid in Singapore. Please tell me how.
Frank, no. Before I go to that, I think I wanted just to share a story from the homicide as well, investigation. And I had a few weeks ago a webinar with a friend of mine who was as well a former policeman. And the key to finding actually what happened to the body was that the person who killed the person went to Google, and this is not a joke, it's a true story, went to Google and Googled what to do with a dead body. And he found that in the history of the laptop. So very easy finding, you know.
I worked with the Hong Kong police. One of our regular training functionalities was with the Hong Kong police. And there was a lady, well, there still is a lady called Nancy Kissel, who is in jail in Hong Kong at the moment. And Nancy Kissel is known as the milkshake murderer. And she and her lover in Hong Kong decided that the husband would be better out of the way. So she Googled, how can I poison my husband? He likes milkshakes. Okay, anybody who wants this information later, I do have it available, and it will be for sale with my free ransomware key, which is available too. But people do stupid things, and it's on the internet. And what is it they say about Vegas? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens on the internet goes to everybody in the world. We do training classes, and we do regularly look at, this is what things save. One of my colleagues who teaches with Magnet Axiom in the States, he actually did what's called a Google takeout, where you can actually apply to Google and say, what do you know about me? And this guy, Larry McLean, got a stack of paper when he printed it out. They don't send you the paper, they send it you electronically. When he printed it out, it was this thick. And he looked through this, and Larry is a happily married man with 4 kids. He's an ex-US Marine colonel. He really good guy. And one of the things they kept on him was some details in relation for him logging on to Match.com, which is a dating site in the US. And I know Larry. I've known him for many, many years. Larry never logged on to Match.com. But somewhere along the line, somebody has gone to a URL which has branched off it somewhere, links to total rubbish. I mean, if you imagine what happened a few years ago, the American magazine Sports Illustrated, and every red-blooded American male waits patiently every year for the swimsuit edition. I hate to be rude and sexist, but if you want to see Venus Williams in a swimsuit, good luck. But at the end of the day, they wait patiently for this to come out. But now they don't get the magazine dropping in their mailbox. They get this electronically. And in the electronic edition, there were ad trackers. And there's an organization, it doesn't exist anymore, called Ad Tracker, which does clicking for pennies. And you click on an advertisement in within the magazine. And somebody who posted that, some advertising agency through Ad Tracker, will get 1 US cent for everybody who clicks on it. Well, linked to it was another site which was called Sex Tracker, which I don't have to tell you what that does. You can probably guess. Okay, and when you clicked on this ad tracker, it also set you up with Sex Tracker. And when I was living in the US, I lived there for 7 years, we had numerous people who would come to training and they'd say, I think something's gone wrong, because when I Google stuff and I do a search on my system, if I do it and my wife does it, we get different results. And I may click on, springtime weather, and my first hit is see Britney Spears naked. Okay, whereas my wife, it just says it's going to be cloudy with the chance of showers for the next 3 days. And they say, is this something that I've done? And the answer is yeah. But did I know I did it? The answer is no. Okay, Charmaine stood up and she's rapidly asking me to admire her watch. That's a very nice watch, Charmaine. She's pointing at it. Okay, so we're going to have to wrap this up. The problem was always going to be, once we actually get together and start exploring this, and we're here, and I'm really gratified, genuinely gratified, that we haven't had the usual drift out of people. But I think it's just the fact that you got free breakfast and it's nice to be out of the house. And obviously you don't need to take your laundry. So I'm going to throw this open to you now, because you've heard from us and the panel have given you a huge insight of information here. And again, I can't stress how lucky it is that I know these people and that they were able to help us out, because otherwise you'd have had to listen to me. Okay, so let's throw this out to you, and Kenneth will pass among you with microphones. Don't worry if you can't think of any questions. We can think of some answers to the questions you don't ask.
Yes, before that, I would like to say thank you to all the panelists for the interesting session. And Frank, especially Frank, I think you are a cybersecurity expert by day, stand-up comedian by night, right? So
There's no such thing as an expert. Okay.
So, okay, so now open the floor. Anyone have any question? Anyone?
It's free.
Okay.
We have a gentleman over there.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great insights for the day. And let me start by saying it was great to be out here. And Frank, I agree with you. This is probably a great way to start. I hope it doesn't stop. Let me just start with a question. I think we all have addressed the elephant in the room in terms of all the ransomware attacks and the phishing, etc. My question is more about, where do you stop? What's the right balance, especially for an organization, to say that they've got good security now? The reason I'm asking is, we're very, very worried about going extreme with security, that running of businesses becomes a little tad bit difficult. So it's more about striking the right balance. Where do you say that this is good for the organization? It's about getting the triage of security domains and the security controls in place, and not going haywire with security.
Okay, anybody want to come in on that? The most secure computer in the world, we used to say, was one where you don't have a keyboard, but now we've got Microsoft Surface. So you can get a keyboard. Magda was going to address your issue, I think, because she removed her mask.
Yeah, at least there's another indication when you want to speak.
Either that or she can't breathe. Okay.
Exactly. Oh. Yeah, unmute mode. Yeah. I think, thank you for the question. I think it's a very, very important question. How do you strike that balance between security and usability? And where do you start? Where do you stop? I think in cybersecurity, it's all about understanding your risk appetite. The same way as you address your financial risk, your operational risk, you need to address your cyber risk in the same or similar way. Understanding what is your risk appetite, what are you happy to compromise over, and what are you not happy to compromise over. Now, of course, that means that you need to understand your risk appetite. And traditionally, we have done that in cybersecurity by using like the qualitative framework. So basically saying your risk is high, medium, low. But that doesn't actually tell you anything from a business perspective. So understanding the consequences from a cost perspective can help you to do that. For example, the easiest scenario that I can give you as a practical step is to look at an e-commerce website. An e-commerce website is generating revenue. So if that website is down for 1 hour, you probably know exactly how much revenue you're going to lose. So how much revenue is your company ready to lose? 1 hour of interruption, 2, 3, 1 day? And accordingly towards that, you're able to choose how do you balance between protection, detection, response, and recovery. Because it's all about the balance. It's not only about protecting, but as well being able to detect any suspicious activity and respond and recover within that risk appetite of yours as well. Now, again, the identification of risk, the best in cybersecurity, what I have seen and that we do as well at Marsh, is scenario-based. So understand what are the 3 worst case scenarios for you as a business, and then try to identify those direct losses and indirect losses, you don't need to be 100% accurate, but that already helps you to take the decisions. And of course, focus on your critical assets, which are generating the most of revenue. But I think to understand that from a business perspective, which actually we don't do in cybersecurity, I have asked this question to some of my peers and I told them, do you actually read the financial reports of your company? If you do, you're going to understand where the priorities of the business are. And that's how you can as well start your risk management from a cyber perspective. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, anyone on the panel want to add to that, or anyone in the audience need to celebrate their freedom by asking a question? Yeah, we have a gentleman here, please, sir.
Yeah, thanks. It won't be justice to the nice breakfast unless we ask a question on the topic of the conference, insider threats. So probably this is the least word that I heard so far. Now that we all know people are working from home, it's not only your own staff, but your service providers, the third party, the consultants who are working for them, who are not full-time staff to your own staff or own company, other they're consultant to even the consultants. How do we manage the risks around them, especially when people are working from home? Is something I would like to know. Thank you.
I noticed Michael is unmuted.
Yeah, I've unmuted literally. So I'll go with that. I think there's a very interesting topic because at the end of the day, I mean, a personal experience that I was in a conference with someone, and then I was saying that you need to download certain app for us to share information. So, and the person, no mention of gender, say that, well, you know, my company laptop does not allow me to do that, so I have to take my children's laptop in order to do that. You know? So that's the problem when you work at home, right? Because there's always other options you can do. And you don't have IT support, I mean, to be fair to the person, you know, so you just find a way to solve your own problem in your environment. So the solution is because of the pandemic, we have moved on to what you call zero trust. So in the past, as long as you work in a company, you're locked into the company server or, you know, environment, then we trust everything that goes on in there, you know. So, but right now, because everyone, although you use the company laptop and you have access to the data, but you're working outside the environment, you know. So hence the whole zero trust model will apply, that everything is not trusted, just like what Pravin was saying, everyone's guilty. Well, what Frank has confirmed, you know, everyone's guilty, you know, until proven innocent. So that's the approach that the market is moving towards in this pandemic, especially when your colleagues or staff are working from home. Anyone else would like to add? Yeah.
I am unmuting myself again. Yes, I definitely, I think that was very, very valuable, Michael. And just to add, you can control what you can control, and you can't control what you cannot control. So your own staff, your own company, you have a certain control, aside from the shadow IT, which is always there, and we need to acknowledge that. Now, in order to achieve a certain control over vendors or suppliers, there is what we call the vendor management aspect. The vendor management will or can take in consideration things like security assessment of your suppliers and vendors. You try to assess what do they have in terms of security controls, and based on their score, in alignment with your risk appetite, you decide what kind of access you're happy to give them. On the other side as well, you can move into additional complex ways like monitoring of certain critical vendors and ensuring that you have that visibility, but of course that's costly. So again, it depends of how you depend on that vendor, what is your risk appetite, and how you can enforce certain things from a security assessment perspective. On the other side, we do as well, very often I recommend controls over contractual clauses. So what does it mean? A very simple example, which I found very often coming from companies using, for example, software development companies. So you can add in your contract a security annex, which all the requirements very well specified what you expect from the company, including the fact that it's their responsibility to fix security bugs at no cost for you. Because if not, whenever they develop something for you and then you find a security bug, you will ask them to fix it, they will ask you for more money. So again, control what you can control. Know for sure that there are things that you don't know, this shadow IT, and you will need to have that risk somehow addressed. For example, with automated security assessment tools like security scorecard or Bitside or digital footprint assessments, and then take that step forward to assess your ecosystem in a way that allows you to feel more comfortable about it with security assessment of your suppliers, contractual clauses, and that's how you protect yourself as well from a legal perspective. So if a breach happens, the risk is always yours, but liability might shift, and that's where you can play on.
Okay. Anything else from the audience? I forgot to unmute, sorry. Anything else from the audience? Yes, sir. If this is a question on jam, we're not taking it.
Oh, okay, thanks. There's many tools available, but often they're out of reach for SMEs, okay? Costly, complexity in managing, team limitations, etc. So perhaps what would be the one key area that you would encourage SMEs to really focus on at this particular point in time to provide the maximum return on that security investment?
I don't think there's any single, while Anna is unmuting, I'm already unmuted. I don't think there's any, if you play golf, and I don't, and I'll prove this to you now, you don't buy one golf bat. That's what we call them. Some people call them clubs, but you don't buy one golf bat, do you? You have a bag of them. So it's a toolbox approach. Because remember the solutions I put up there, yes, I criticize the perimeter defense, but by the same token, does that mean you don't have one? And the answer is no. So it's a combination of tools I think that you need.
Yeah, I completely agree. On what I'm sort of alluding to is actually what is those key element areas, right? Because we see so many fantastic tools managing authentication and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. But what are the key areas that if you had to limit it down, what are those, if you like, one or two or even more? Key areas that we should be focusing our attention on. One of the
things that I feel has been seriously neglected is, do you remember on my slide where we had the green, amber and red, and we got to the red and we said, how do I fix it? How do I remediate it? And how do I stop them revisiting? In common cases of burglary, for example, in the US, the police often find that the burglar revisits the scene. So one of the things we should be looking at is once you investigate what it was that caused it and what let them in, how do you remediate and how do you fix it? And that's one of the tools we shouldn't neglect. In my defense here, one of the parameters for this event was that there would be no selling, and I hope you noticed that we haven't rammed anything down your throat. So can I ask you if you could take a name card and we'll approach you offline, because I don't want this to become a selling shop. So we can approach you offline and be more than happy within our Bounga arrangement to talk to you about what would be available to you. And again, I'm going to break my word here and say if you want to come back to us, and we will actually be, there is no such thing as a free breakfast or free jam. Okay, we will be coming to you. We won't become a pain in your neck. We will be coming to you and offering, for example, a health check for you. And saying, have you considered this, have you considered that, without fee and without any obligation for you. So we'll be happy to do that. And I noticed that Anna has unmasked, and Magda has as well, which I see now out of my peripheral version. But Anna was first, so please be patient. Anna, go ahead.
It's all right. I'm not going to try and sell anything. I was just going to talk, obviously from a technical, I'm not going to talk about tools and things like that. That's not in here. But, I think there's kind of three main categories we can think about this. There's the people, there's the processes, and then there's the data and the technology. So, absolutely, there are various tools out there, and you can think about, which ones make sense for you based on your risk appetite, as Magna alluded to as well. But, the people is also a big aspect. So, the training, the engagement, as I talked about earlier, that's, key to look at that and how you can best manage that. Because, you could invest, in all the tools that you want, but if your people are going to let you down, that's a big challenge. And then your process. So really looking at the programs that you've got in place, your compliance policies, making sure that they are, and we'll go back to something that Michael talks about right at the beginning, they've got to be adaptive. You've got to be looking at the new threats that you're facing and making sure that, your policies are up to date to meet that, but also fit for purpose. So, we talked about some of the scenario training as well, making sure that they are actually going to work in practice. You can have it written down on reams and reams of, paper or, electronic PDFs nowadays, I guess. But, if people don't know how to put that into practice, similarly, again, with the technology, if they don't know how to use it, then it's just not going to work.
Magda, do you want to come in?
Yes, I do.
That was a rhetorical question.
So I will not as well mention any tool specifically, but I love hacking in my spare time. So how does hack... It's true, at night.
Now you
Saturday, 3 in the morning, this weekend.
I sent her the money to actually launder that money from her husband's account, and I'm still waiting.
So how does it work? There are two, I would say, set of things that I will look at. Compromised credentials, so passwords, and then technical vulnerabilities on the asset of the company. So I will focus on those. If I have a password that is leaked from someone using an email within the company, if that person or individual doesn't have two-factor authentication, I'm in. How many companies or SMEs are using Office 365? 99.99%? Easy, right? So on the technical side, I will look at anything from Windows, machines to any available website that has technical vulnerabilities. And I will look if those vulnerabilities are exploitable or can be taken advantage to take over that asset, which actually leads to the fact that whenever you're using an asset, you need to update it at all time to keep it actually with as less as possible technical vulnerabilities. So now this leads me to the third point. Basically, whenever an attack happens, at some point it can be stopped by tools that basically will detect that something is happening and decide that this is wrong. And that's basically the alerts and the tools that you have inside to make sure that you're aware, but this is not normal activity within my environment. So again, 2 entry points and alerts at the end that are very, very practical examples and really important for an SME especially to consider.
Hopefully that goes some way. But as I say, I didn't want this to become a selling show because that's not the objective of it. I don't know if we've got time for any more.
We can do one more question. Last question. Okay.
And thank you all very much for your questions. I mean, again, there's nothing worse than sitting there in a stony silence, but obviously, hopefully we must have addressed something.
All right, terrific. First of all, thanks very much. I think the discussion has been excellent so far, and the views and perspectives from the panel have been fantastic. My question, though, is if we make our environments too restrictive and implement too many controls, does that encourage, shadow IT and people to work around those controls? I like to call shadow IT citizen IT, because ultimately, people still have to do their jobs. They still need room to be creative, they still need room to grow, and they still need room to function and operate. So is there a way to give people the freedom in order to be able to perform and excel, but in a secure manner? Maybe there's a philosophical shift that needs to occur. Instead of this versus adversarial relationship we have with our users, is there a way that maybe we can be part of the same team and cooperate and maybe steer and guide them?
Okay, anybody? I saw a presentation last week where they actually did a straw poll and said how many people consider security measures and passwords as a hindrance, and the feedback was over 80%. 80% of people think that the security measures in place and passwords, like somebody said on the panel, so I'll get round it by using my kid's computer. So I don't know, anybody want to come in on that? I noticed they've all not unmuted here. So they're obviously exhausted now. Thank you, Pravin.
Andre, that's a really loaded question, by the way, because I think all of us came up here and we're thinking, we got to talk about security and how you prevent how you prevent people from getting too creative. And you've asked the opposite question: how do we let people be creative in a secure manner? And honestly, I got to say, I've not really thought about it. not really had to ever think about that. And it's always, I think it always just kind of comes back to the risk appetite of the organization and the security posture. And it's striking that balance. And I think that's something that I think all of us have kind of mentioned here. It's always about kind of striking that balance of, creativity, innovation, and then security on the other side as well. And my personal feel is that if you do want to allow that, then an organization has to be able to understand the risk around it. That if you're going to have people who are going to be a bit more creative, a bit more innovative, and if they need to, I guess that's what development environments are for, right? You have dev environments, so go and play around and go and destroy a dev environment and go and blow it up, right? Just don't bring it into production. Right.
I think one of the things you've got to do is treat your staff with some degree of respect. And when they highlight something and when they come to you, reward it. Because if people bring to you security breaches, it shouldn't be, oh, you found another thing, you're really a pain. And that, unfortunately, is true. I remember in the brief time that I was in uniform, a superintendent arriving on parade, and they all do it, don't they? They arrive and they say, oh, I'm here for you, this. And this one guy walked on and he went, I'm your superintendent, blah, blah, blah. I'm new here in this subdivision. And please remember, my door is always closed to you lot. Not my door's always open, my door is always closed to you lot. And he had no man management problems. But when he left, the policeman in the police station gift wrapped a rat and gave it to him. So again, treat your staff with some degree of respect. That doesn't mean just give them the keys to your kingdom. It means value what they do and allow some degree of creativity. And in the same way that we turn around and say that passwords are a hindrance and security features are a hindrance, it shouldn't be, I'm going to make this really difficult for people. People should be in a position where they can design systems which are user-friendly. How many times over the last 2 years have you tried to do something you think, and this is supposed to be easy? And unfortunately, even now going online and trying to pay your phone bill through some of the telcos in Singapore, and you can't, if you have more than one device, and linking the two together to pay them both, you can't say show all, because it doesn't work. And when you say to them, this doesn't work, oh yeah, we're fixing it. Well, they've been fixing it now for 2.5 years. So make things so that the people like to use them. People appreciate using them. It shouldn't be, oh God, I've got to do this again. So just try and make it that people will appreciate it and maybe use it. I think we're just sort of at the end now. Yes. And if we overstay our welcome, we'll get charged more. Okay. And we've given you breakfast, so our hospitality is done now. I just want to say, I'm going to steal Kenneth's thunder here. I just want to thank these fine people for giving up their time. They've given up their time. So can I ask you to put your hands together and appreciate them? And also, more importantly, yourselves. Okay, if you hadn't been here, then this would have been pointless. Talking to ourselves would have been very entertaining, very educational. We did it at the table, but coming up here and giving us the opportunity to share our views with you, for that I thank you very much. And panel, put your hands together and thank the people out there. On behalf of Bounga, thank you very much indeed for coming. Hope you've enjoyed the event. You know where we are. We're here in Singapore. Hopefully we're not going anywhere anytime soon. And I'll be sending out spam emails to you later on today. And please put the money into my bank account later. That's probably yeah, my bank account is called Standard HSBC BS. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day and please stay safe.
Thank you.